Tonight, we open a door that was never meant to be touched. A thread of history buried beneath millennia, a connection so ancient it reaches back to the world's very first civilization, the Sumerians. For centuries, the Vatican has been seen as the heart of faith, the keeper of Christ's legacy. But what if behind that image lies a far older inheritance, one carried forward from Mesopotamian temples to the cathedrals of Rome? This isn't just about myths written on clay or rituals whispered in the desert. It's about knowledge passed in secret, rewritten in scripture, and locked away in stone vaults where no light dares to reach. Ziggurats turned into towers, goddesses reborn as saints, sacred calendars folded into the rhythms of Christian time. The echoes of Sumer may never have disappeared. They may live on in the very institution that claims to guide humanity. So before you dismiss this as coincidence, ask yourself, what if the Vatican is not just the heir of Christ, but the last guardian of the Sumerian legacy? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we follow the hidden thread. And once you see it, history will never look the same again. A city rises in the heart of Europe, its marble walls gleaming under the sun, its great dome towering above all. To millions, it is the holiest place on earth, the Vatican, said to be the eternal guardian of Christ's message. But what if, behind its grand facade, the Vatican holds secrets that stretch not 2,000 years, but 6,000 years, back to a time when the first civilization of mankind shaped the world? What if the roots of its rituals, its symbols, and even its power began not in Jerusalem or Rome, but in the land of the Sumerians, the people of Mesopotamia who walked the earth long before the Bible was ever written? The paradox is clear. We are told the Vatican is the direct successor of St. Peter, the rock upon which the Christian church was built. Yet scattered whispers and strange connections suggest a much deeper lineage, one that ties the Vatican not only to the early church, but to the earliest kings, priests, and gods worshipped along the rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates. Could it be that what we call Christianity is not entirely original, but a continuation of stories and powers that were first shaped in Sumer thousands of years before Christ? Sumer, the cradle of civilization, rose around the 4th millennium before Christ. These were the people who invented writing, who carved wedge marks into clay to record the laws of kings and the words of gods. They built ziggurats that reached toward the heavens. They mapped the skies, tracked the stars, and told stories of divine beings descending to earth. Their myths echo eerily within the pages of Genesis, within the very foundations of faith. Was this a coincidence, or was it deliberate inheritance, carefully veiled through time until only shadows remained visible? The Vatican today is a fortress of stone, but beneath it lies another fortress, a fortress of silence. Deep in the vaults, the secret archive is said to stretch for miles, housing manuscripts and relics unseen by the outside world. Could among those relics be the last untouched tablets of Sumer, preserved not in Iraqi deserts but in Roman cellars, kept away from prying eyes because they contain truths too old, too disruptive, too dangerous? If the stories of creation, of floods, of divine rulers were written first in Sumer and then reshaped into Holy Scripture, it would mean the Vatican is less the origin of faith and more its ultimate editor. The question strikes at the heart of human history. Did the first priests of Sumer, who claimed to speak for gods that walked among men, pass down their mantle through empires, through Babylon, through Persia, through Rome, until it found its final form in white robes and golden crowns? When a pope lifts his staff and speaks as the voice of heaven on earth, is he echoing a tradition that began not with Peter, but with En, the Sumerian word for high priest and lord? If true, this hidden origin would mean the Vatican is not just the guardian of Christian belief, but the last keeper of Sumerian memory, a bridge not between God and man, but between the first civilization and the modern world. That would make it the most powerful custodian of time itself, for whoever controls the past controls the story of humanity. And if that story began in Sumer, then perhaps the Vatican has always known that the beginning was never where we thought it was. Long before Rome rose to power, before the prophets of the Bible spoke their words, there was a land that shaped the destiny of mankind. It lay between the great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia. There, the Sumerians built the first known civilization. They were not simple farmers. They created cities, organized laws, mapped the stars, and carved words into clay tablets that still survive today. It is from them that the first chapters of human history were written, and it is through them that many later traditions found their hidden roots. The Sumerians invented writing. With their system of cuneiform, they turned clay into memory, capturing not only trade records but hymns, prayers, and stories of gods and kings. This act of recording human thought was revolutionary. It meant that knowledge could outlast a single lifetime. It meant that ideas could be spread and preserved. In time, writing would become the tool of power. Just as the priests of Sumer used their tablets, the Vatican centuries later would rely on its own manuscripts and scriptures to shape the minds of millions. The link between clay and parchment is not an accident. It is a chain of memory passed down through civilizations. The Sumerians also built the first known legal codes. Long before the Ten Commandments, rulers like Ur-Nammu issued laws that bound society together. These laws were not only about crime or punishment. They carried a sacred tone, declaring that justice came from the gods and had to be preserved by kings and priests. Compare this to the Catholic Church centuries later, where canon law shaped the lives of believers and was said to carry divine authority. In both cases, law was never just about order. It was about power rooted in heaven. Astronomy was another gift of Sumer. By watching the stars, they created calendars, predicted seasons, and aligned their temples with celestial events. Their understanding of the heavens went far beyond survival. They believed the movements of planets and stars revealed the will of the gods. This vision would echo through the ages, influencing biblical prophecies and later Catholic practices tied to calendars, feast days, and the cycles of the sun and moon. Even the reform of the calendar by the Vatican in the 16th century carried the same echo, time itself as a sacred tool of control. And then there were the temples. The Sumerians built ziggurats, massive stepped structures rising high above their cities. These were not just buildings. They were cosmic ladders, bridges between earth and heaven, places where priests could commune with divine beings. Thousands of years later, the Vatican would crown itself with St. Peter's Basilica, another monumental structure designed not only to inspire awe, but to declare a connection to heaven itself. The idea that architecture can embody divine authority began in Sumer and survives in the heart of Rome. The cradle of civilization is not just a phrase. It is the place where the tools of religion, law, writing, and cosmic order were born. And when we see these same tools alive within the Vatican today, the question rises like a shadow. Did the Church simply invent its traditions, or did it inherit them, carefully reshaped from the very first civilization humanity ever knew? If the Sumerians lit the first flame of knowledge, perhaps it has never gone out, only passed hand to hand, guarded through time, until it burned again beneath the dome of the Vatican. Buried under layers of sand and forgotten cities, archaeologists uncovered fragments of clay that told stories unlike anything in the Bible. These were the cuneiform tablets of the Sumerians, some written more than 4,000 years before Christ. They spoke of powerful beings who descended from the sky, who guided humanity, and who ruled like gods. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, a name that still sparks debates today. To the ancients, they were not myths, but real figures whose presence shaped the first civilization. The tablets describe how the Anunnaki gave knowledge to mankind, teaching them farming, architecture, and even the secrets of the stars. They were often shown as towering beings, part divine and part human. with wings stretched wide. Their stories sound strikingly similar to the biblical accounts of angels, the watchers who came down to earth, and the sons of God mentioned in the book of Genesis. Could it be that what the Bible later called angels were already present in Sumerian tradition under different names? The overlap is too great to ignore. In Genesis, there is a mysterious passage that speaks of the sons of God taking human wives and creating children who were mighty men of renown. The Sumerian tablets tell a parallel story of gods mixing with humans and shaping royal bloodlines. In both cases, the boundary between heaven and earth was crossed. In both cases, humanity was altered. If the Vatican guards texts that trace back to these Sumerian stories, it may explain why certain passages of the Bible remain so cryptic, so shrouded in mystery, as if they are fragments of a much older tale. The Anunnaki were also described as bringers of advanced knowledge. They taught the secrets of metallurgy, mathematics, and astronomy. Some tablets even hint at knowledge of the solar system that should have been impossible to know at the time, including planets not visible to the naked eye. Were these simply myths, or records of something humanity has chosen to forget? And if the Vatican inherited or acquired these texts, would it not be in their interest to keep them hidden, preserving the authority of divine mystery while quietly guarding the older sources? Imagine for a moment that the towering angels painted on the ceilings of cathedrals are not unique Christian visions, but echoes of winged beings carved onto clay thousands of years earlier. Imagine that the chants of monks praising heavenly hosts are built on a memory far older than the Bible itself. If that is true, then the Vatican does not only preserve Christian tradition, it preserves the last thread of the oldest story humanity ever told about beings from beyond who walked among us. The lost tablets of the gods are not just dusty relics. They are mirrors reflecting a forgotten truth. A truth where angels and Anunnaki may be one and the same, where heaven and earth once mingled openly, and where the line between myth and history is not clear at all. If those tablets were ever placed in the hidden shelves of the Vatican archives, then the silence of the Church is not denial, it is protection. Protection of a story that could forever change how we see our origins, and how we understand the beings we still call divine. In the beginning, we are told, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible opens with a line that has echoed through centuries of belief, a line repeated in churches and whispered in prayers. But long before Genesis was written, another creation story had already been told. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians and later the Babylonians preserved myths like the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis. These stories describe the birth of the world, the struggles of gods, and the shaping of humanity. When the words of Genesis are compared to these much older accounts, the similarities are impossible to dismiss. The Enuma Elish, dating back nearly 4,000 years before Christ, begins with a formless void, water above and water below, from which the first gods emerge. They battle for supremacy, and from the chaos, the heavens and earth are divided. In Genesis, written thousands of years later, the same theme appears: a formless void, darkness over the deep, a division between heaven and earth. The order of creation is strikingly similar, as if the biblical version is a refined echo of the Sumerian tale. Was this simply coincidence, or deliberate inheritance shaped to fit a new religious vision? The Atrahasis takes the comparison further. In this myth, the gods create humans not as a noble act of love, but as workers. Fashioned from clay, mixed with divine essence, humanity was made to toil and serve the will of higher beings. Compare this to Genesis, where God forms Adam from dust and breathes life into him. The substance may change, the tone may soften, but the core image remains the same. Humanity shaped from earth, infused with something divine. Did the biblical authors take an older myth and reframe it to emphasize obedience to one God instead of many? Flood stories also link these traditions. The Atrahasis, and, later, the Epic of Gilgamesh describe a great flood sent by the gods to cleanse the earth of noisy and troublesome humans. A chosen man is warned, builds a boat, saves animals, and survives. In Genesis, Noah receives the same command. He builds an ark, saves the animals, and restarts humanity. The details are nearly identical. If the Sumerians preserved this memory first, then Genesis may be a retelling designed to shift the power of creation and judgment from many gods to one. The Vatican teaches that Genesis is divine truth, the foundation of Christian cosmology. Yet, within the quiet of its libraries, do scholars acknowledge the older myths that shaped it? If the Enuma Elish and Atrahasis influence the Bible, then the Vatican is not merely guarding scripture. It is guarding a chain of inheritance that reaches back to the world's first civilization. The question is why this link is rarely admitted. Perhaps because to reveal that the creation story is not unique but adapted would shake the very claim of originality upon which the Church's authority rests. Creation stories rewritten are not lies. They are memories carried forward, reshaped for new ages, retold for new peoples. But if the Vatican knows that Genesis was not the beginning, only the editing of an older tale, then it holds more than faith. It holds the power to decide what version of creation humanity is allowed to believe. Long before Noah ever built his ark, the Sumerians told of a flood so great it wiped away nearly all of humanity. Their story survives in clay tablets, etched in cuneiform thousands of years before the Bible was ever written. It is known through the tale of Atrahasis and the later Epic of Gilgamesh. In both accounts, the gods decide to drown the world. They send storms and rising waters to cleanse the earth of people who had become too loud, too restless, too difficult for the divine to manage. But one man, chosen by a god who pitied humanity, was warned in advance. He built a great boat, gathered his family and animals, and survived the deluge. When the waters receded, life began again. The details sound hauntingly familiar, almost identical to the biblical story of Noah. Genesis presents the flood as an act of God's judgment against wickedness. Noah, a righteous man, is commanded to build an ark of precise dimensions. He takes pairs of animals and preserves life until the earth is cleansed. The parallels to the Sumerian accounts are undeniable. A chosen man, a boat, animals saved, a world drowned, and a new beginning. The question is whether the biblical flood is an independent revelation, or whether it is a retelling of a memory that already existed for centuries in Mesopotamia. The Vatican upholds the flood of Noah as one of the greatest events in sacred history, a turning point in God's relationship with humanity. Yet scholars who have studied the Sumerian and Babylonian texts cannot ignore the similarities. If the Sumerians recorded this story first, why does the Bible mirror it so closely? Could it be that when the Hebrew scribes crafted their version, they adapted older Mesopotamian traditions to fit a new monotheistic framework? If so, then the Vatican is not only guarding the biblical story, it may be preserving a rewritten version of a much older truth. The implications are enormous. If the flood of Noah was inspired by the flood of Atrahasis, then the Bible does not stand alone as the first record of divine judgment. It is part of a longer chain of myths and memories stretching back to the dawn of civilization. This would mean that the Vatican's narrative of a unique, God-given history is less about originality and more about control, shaping how generations would remember events that humanity already knew. Imagine the consequences if the public fully realized that the story of Noah was not new but ancient, that it was one of many flood stories passed down from the first civilizations. Would the faithful begin to question what else in Scripture might be adapted from older sources? Would they wonder if divine authority was built not on revelation, but on inheritance? Perhaps this is why the Vatican has always emphasized Noah's flood as singular, while the Sumerian and Babylonian accounts remain largely hidden in scholarly circles. The flood before Noah is more than a myth. It is a memory, one that connects cultures separated by centuries. It suggests that humanity once shared a story of survival so powerful it became the foundation for legends across the world. The Vatican's silence about these older tales may not be accidental. It may be deliberate, a way to ensure that only one version of the flood remains dominant, a version that places the Church as the guardian of the truth, even if that truth was borrowed from the clay tablets of Sumer. In the book of Genesis, there is a curious story about a tower built in the land of Shinar. Humanity, speaking one language, came together to build a structure that would reach the heavens, but God was displeased. He confused their tongues, scattered them across the earth, and the tower was left unfinished. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. For centuries it has been told as a warning against pride. But beneath the surface, it may be a retelling of something older, something rooted in the heart of Sumerian civilization. The Sumerians built ziggurats, massive stepped temples rising from the flat Mesopotamian plain. These were not ordinary buildings. They were cosmic bridges, designed as stairways between earth and sky. Priests ascended them to offer sacrifices and commune with the gods. From Ur to Babylon, these monumental structures dominated the horizon. Their very design, with levels stacked one on top of the other, looked like giant staircases into the heavens. For the people who lived there, the ziggurat was proof that humanity could connect with the divine. When the Bible speaks of a tower in Shinar, it is pointing directly to this tradition. Shinar is another name for Sumer. The Tower of Babel is no mystery at all. It is a memory of the ziggurats that stood as the greatest achievements of ancient Mesopotamia. The story of God scattering the builders is striking, because it reframes what the Sumerians saw as holy into something sinful. What they believed was a sacred ladder became, in the biblical version, a symbol of arrogance. This reversal raises the question: was the Tower of Babel story a deliberate reinterpretation, designed to erase the legacy of Sumerian sacred architecture? The Vatican has always emphasized the Tower of Babel as a tale of human weakness, proof that only God decides the boundaries between heaven and earth. Yet, if the story is truly rooted in the ziggurats, it would mean the Bible took one of humanity's earliest religious monuments and turned it into a cautionary fable. Instead of celebrating the Sumerians for their vision, it condemns them. Instead of preserving their memory, it paints them as rebels. The effect is powerful. By redefining the ziggurat, the biblical authors ensured that future generations would remember only the failure, not the achievement. The question then becomes, why? Why take an architectural wonder and recast it as a symbol of punishment? Perhaps because the ziggurat represented an independent path to the divine, a way for humans to reach heaven without needing priests or scripture. To the Sumerians, the temple was the bridge. To the Church, that idea was dangerous. If humanity could build its own way to God, what need would there be for a religious hierarchy to stand in between? Today, the ziggurats of Sumer lie in ruins, their bricks crumbling in the desert. But the Tower of Babel story remains alive, told in pulpits, classrooms, and films. What was once sacred has been transformed into myth, and the original meaning forgotten. If the Vatican has preserved knowledge of the true purpose of the ziggurats, it has chosen silence, allowing the biblical version to dominate. The Tower of Babel, remembered as a curse, may in truth be a distorted memory of humanity's first attempt to touch the stars. And the greatest irony of all is that the very stones meant to connect heaven and earth may still whisper their purpose, while the world repeats a story that was rewritten long ago. In the ruins of Mesopotamia, archaeologists discovered thousands of clay tablets inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, the written language of the Sumerians. By the second millennium, before Christ, the Sumerian people themselves had faded, replaced by Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. Yet the language did not die. For centuries after, it was still studied, recited, and preserved. To those later civilizations, Sumerian was no longer a common tongue. It was considered sacred, a language of the gods, untranslatable for ordinary people. Only priests and scribes trained in secret schools could understand it. This practice sounds strangely familiar. For almost 2,000 years, the Catholic Church preserved Latin in the same way. Long after the Roman Empire collapsed, Latin remained the official language of worship, law, and scholarship. Ordinary believers could not read it or speak it, yet every prayer, every mass, every Bible verse delivered by priests was in Latin. The faithful were told it was the language of God, beyond their reach, requiring intermediaries to explain it. The similarity between Sumerian and Latin is chilling. Two civilizations, separated by millennia, both chose to seal sacred knowledge inside a language the people could not understand. Was this coincidence, or the survival of a control tactic passed down from the world's first priests? In ancient Mesopotamia, Sumerian was used in temple hymns, rituals, and inscriptions that connected human life to the divine. It was not a spoken language of the marketplace. It was a code of the heavens, and those who could interpret it held enormous power. In the Middle Ages, Latin served the same role. The Bible existed in Latin. Legal decrees were written in Latin. Even scientific manuscripts were hidden behind Latin phrases. If a farmer or craftsman wanted to know the truth, he could not simply read it. He needed a priest. He needed the church. The result was control through language. Language shapes thought. When only a small elite can access it, they become the gatekeepers of meaning. In Sumer, scribes and priests became the custodians of divine will. In the Vatican, the clergy became the interpreters of God's law. Both systems created dependency. People could not question what they could not read. They could not resist what they could not understand. And when knowledge is locked in words that only a chosen few can decipher, it becomes a weapon. The fact that both Sumer and the Vatican relied on this method suggests something deeper. Perhaps the Vatican did not invent its reliance on Latin. Perhaps it inherited the practice, consciously or unconsciously, from a tradition stretching back to the first civilization. A tradition where sacred knowledge is never lost, but always hidden behind a barrier. The barrier is not a wall of stone, it is a wall of words. Today, Latin has mostly faded from Catholic rituals, replaced by local languages, but the pattern remains. Authority often thrives by making truth complex, distant, and inaccessible. Just as Sumerian was once called the language of the gods, Latin was called the language of the church. Both carried the same hidden message. If you want to reach the divine, you must come through us. And that, more than anything, shows how ancient ideas about control have never really disappeared. They have only been rewritten, passed from clay to parchment, from ziggurat to cathedral, from Sumer to Rome. In the land of Sumer, power did not rest in kings alone. It was shared with priests who claimed to speak on behalf of the gods. These priest-kings stood at the center of society, uniting divine will with earthly authority. They were more than rulers. They were intermediaries, the bridge between humanity and the heavens. Every decision, from war to harvest, was wrapped in ritual and justified by the favor of unseen beings. To disobey the priest-king was not only treason against the state, it was rebellion against the gods themselves. The Sumerians built temples at the heart of their cities, and within these sacred walls, the priest-kings presided. They offered sacrifices, interpreted omens, and spoke words said to carry divine command. Their power did not rely on weapons alone, it relied on belief. The people trusted that these leaders were chosen by the gods, and that their rule reflected cosmic order. The entire structure of Sumerian society was built on this idea of sacred kingship, and though the civilization of Sumer faded, the pattern of priestly authority did not. Thousands of years later, the Vatican would rise in Rome, and at its center stands a figure who bears an uncanny resemblance to the priest-kings of old. The Pope is called the Vicar of Christ, the representative of God on earth. His words are treated as binding for millions. His authority extends beyond politics into the spiritual lives of the faithful. When he speaks, it is not as a man, but as the chosen voice of heaven. This mirrors almost perfectly the role played by the Sumerian intermediaries, who fused the divine and the earthly into one position of power. The Pope, like the priest-kings, is surrounded by ritual. Incense fills the air, robes and crowns mark his sacred role. Ceremonies unfold in great halls of stone that echo the temples of Mesopotamia. The gestures may be different, but the symbolism is the same. A single figure placed at the center, guiding the people, interpreting the will of the divine, and holding the authority to bless or condemn. It is a model so ancient that its origins may lie buried in the clay bricks of the first cities. This continuity raises questions that cut deep. Did the Vatican invent its system of papal authority, or did it inherit a blueprint already tested in the world's first civilization? If the Sumerians proved that societies could be controlled by uniting divine belief with earthly power, then the Church may have simply perfected that method across centuries. The title may have changed, from priest-king to pope, but the essence remained the same. Power rooted not in armies, but in the conviction that one man can serve as the mouthpiece of heaven. The priests of the old world may be gone, their names erased by time, but their influence lives on. Every time a pope lifts his hand to bless the faithful, he is echoing a role first played on the banks of the Euphrates. The Vatican may present itself as unique, but history whispers otherwise. The system it upholds today may be nothing more than a continuation of a design first shaped in the temples of Sumer, and if that is true, then the story of priestly power is not 2,000 years old, but as old as civilization itself. The Sumerians were not only the builders of cities and temples, they were the first to look into the night sky and see more than stars. To them, the heavens were a clock, a vast map where the gods wrote their will. By watching the movements of the moon, the paths of planets, and the cycles of the sun, they created calendars that guided every aspect of life. Planting, harvesting, festivals, and even wars were planned according to the stars. Time itself became sacred, and those who could read the skies held the keys to divine knowledge. The Sumerians divided the sky into constellations and tracked the rising and setting of planets with astonishing accuracy. They built a calendar based on the cycles of the moon, 12 months of 30 days each, with special adjustments to keep it aligned with the seasons. They knew the length of a year was not perfect, and they created complex systems to correct it. To them, the heavens were alive, and the patterns above were messages to be decoded. Priests and astronomers became one and the same, guardians of a sacred science that gave order to the world. This marriage of astronomy and religion did not vanish. It spread through Babylon, Persia, and eventually into Rome. And when the Vatican rose to power, it too became obsessed with the measurement of time. The Church declared holy days, feast days, and seasons, all carefully tied to the movements of the heavens. Easter itself is calculated not by a simple date, but by the first Sunday after the full moon following the spring equinox, a method that echoes ancient Mesopotamian practice. The very rhythm of Christian worship is still guided by the same cosmic cycles the Sumerians once charted. In the 16th century, Pope Gregory XIII reformed the calendar, creating what we now call the Gregorian calendar. It replaced the older Julian system and adjusted the length of the year to better match the solar cycle. On the surface, this was a scientific improvement, but it also reveals something deeper. Why was the Vatican so determined to control the calendar? Because time is power. By setting the calendar, the Church decided when people would work, when they would rest, when they would worship, and when they would celebrate. It was the same principle the Sumerians had practiced thousands of years earlier. The similarities cannot be ignored. The Sumerians saw the sky as a divine blueprint. the Vatican declared time as a sacred order flowing through the Church. Both linked heaven and earth through calendars and rituals. Both insisted that only trained priests could interpret these patterns for the people. Was this merely coincidence? Or did the Vatican quietly inherit a Sumerian system of sacred time, reshaping it to fit its own authority? When we look at the calendar today, it seems like a neutral tool, just numbers on a page. But hidden within it are layers of ancient meaning. The cycle of months, the timing of festivals, the corrections that keep the year aligned with the sun, all have roots stretching back to Sumer. The Vatican may not speak of this inheritance, but its grip on time itself echoes the first civilization's quest to control the heavens. Perhaps the Church did not just guard the soul, perhaps it also inherited the stars, ensuring that humanity's clock would always tick to the rhythm of the sacred. In the ruins of Sumerian temples and palaces, carved into stone and pressed into clay, we find a language that speaks without words, symbols. A simple cross etched into a tablet, a star enclosed in a circle, an unblinking eye staring outward. To the Sumerians, these were not decorations. They were sacred marks carrying layers of meaning. The cross represented the four corners of the earth and the meeting of heaven and earth at a central point. The star signified divine presence, often linked to the goddess Inanna, while the eye was a symbol of watchfulness, a reminder that the gods observed every human action. These symbols, thousands of years old, did not vanish with the fall of Sumer. They travelled through time, appearing again in places that should have had no connection. Step into the Vatican, and you will see crosses everywhere. Not just the Christian cross of sacrifice, but variations resembling the ancient marks of Mesopotamia. On ceilings, in mosaics, on the robes of priests, the cross remains the central emblem of faith. Stars, too, fill the artwork, often surrounding the Virgin Mary or forming halos around saints. And then there is the eye. The so-called Eye of Providence, a single eye within a triangle, watching from above. Officially, it represents God's omniscience, yet its roots echo the same ancient symbol of divine surveillance carved by Sumerian hands. The question is unavoidable. Did these symbols survive by coincidence, or were they intentionally carried forward? Historians often claim that symbols like the cross are universal, that they appear in many cultures independently. But when the very same shapes, with the very same meanings appear in both Sumerian art and Vatican iconography, the possibility of inheritance grows stronger. The cross as a meeting point of heaven and earth, the star as divine light, the eye as eternal watchfulness. These ideas are too specific to dismiss. The Sumerians used symbols to bind their people to belief. Every temple bore them, every ritual invoked them. They were constant reminders of the god's power. The Vatican does the same. Its symbols are not merely artistic. They are messages meant to reach the subconscious, reinforcing authority through familiar signs. A believer does not need to read scripture to understand the meaning of the cross, the star, or the eye. The symbol itself carries the weight of the divine. That is why symbols endure. They bypass reason and speak directly to memory. If the Vatican inherited Sumerian symbols, it also inherited their power. Symbols are bridges across time. They allow ideas to survive even when words are rewritten. The Bible may reshape creation myths. Church councils may censor ancient texts. But a cross carved into stone 5,000 years ago still whispers through the symbols we see today. It suggests that the Church did not invent its imagery, but adopted it, weaving it into a new narrative while hiding its true origin. Perhaps that is why the Vatican holds such sway. Its power is not only in sermons or scripture. It lies in the silent language of symbols, a language older than Christianity, older than Rome, reaching back to the temples of Sumer. The symbols that once belonged to the world's first civilization now stand in cathedrals, glowing in stained glass, etched into marble, waiting to remind us that history may be far more connected than we have ever been told. Long before Christianity spread across Europe, long before the Vatican raised its cathedrals, the people of Sumer worshipped a goddess whose image still lingers in the echoes of history. Her name was Inanna, later known as Ishtar, the Queen of Heaven. She was celebrated as both warrior and mother, bringer of love and fertility, yet also fierce and unyielding in battle. Inanna stood as the embodiment of the divine feminine, a celestial figure who connected the earth to the stars and humanity to the mysteries of life and death. Her temples towered over Mesopotamian cities, filled with hymns that praised her as radiant, compassionate, and eternally watchful. Centuries later, in the heart of the Christian world, another figure began to rise. The Virgin Mary, Mother of Christ, was given titles that sound hauntingly familiar: Queen of Heaven, Mother of Mercy, Intercessor for Humanity. Images of Mary often show her draped in blue, standing upon the moon, crowned with stars, her arms open to receive the faithful. This imagery mirrors depictions of Inanna, who was also crowned with celestial symbols, often portrayed standing on the back of lions or framed by radiant light. Though the names changed, the archetype remained the same: a mother who bridges heaven and earth, adored as both protector and guide. The question arises, did Christianity invent the veneration of Mary, or did it inherit and reshape a tradition far older than itself? The Sumerians had already established the idea of a divine mother figure central to worship. Inanna was celebrated through rituals of mourning and rejoicing, reflecting the cycles of death and rebirth. In Christian tradition, Mary too becomes the figure of sorrow and joy, weeping at the crucifixion, yet glorified in resurrection imagery. These parallels suggest continuity, as if the Vatican did not create devotion to a celestial mother, but absorbed an ancient longing for the feminine divine and gave it new form. This continuity is striking because official church doctrine often downplays Mary's role. Yet in practice, across centuries, millions have prayed to her, built shrines in her honor, and claimed visions of her appearing in radiant light. From Lourdes to Fatima, Mary is said to reveal herself with messages of compassion and warning, much like Inanna once spoke through omens and dreams. The pattern is unmistakable. The feminine divine refuses to be silenced, resurfacing again and again, even when religions try to suppress her voice. If the Vatican truly inherited the archetype of Inanna, it also inherited the power that comes with her. A celestial mother figure offers comfort that male gods often cannot. She is approachable, compassionate, and deeply human. She embodies the balance between authority and mercy. By elevating Mary to such heights, the Church ensured that an ancient memory would continue, cloaked in Christian garments but rooted in Sumerian soil. Perhaps this is why the image of Mary resonates so strongly, why statues of her stand in villages and cities around the world, glowing candles at their feet. She may not only be the mother of Christ, but the latest face of a truth far older, that humanity has always sought a mother in the heavens, and that the Vatican's veneration of Mary is a continuation of a story first told beneath the ziggurats of Sumer. In the earliest days of civilization, the Sumerians believed kingship was not a human invention, but a divine gift. Their records speak of rulers chosen by the gods, men whose authority flowed through blood as much as through law. To sit on the throne was to carry sacred lineage, a connection stretching back to the Anunnaki themselves. These priest-kings were not seen as ordinary men elevated by fortune. They were marked by descent, a bloodline set apart, linking earth to the heavens. This idea of sacred blood did not disappear when Sumer fell. It seeped into the cultures that followed, through Babylon, Assyria, and Persia, until it reached Rome. Roman emperors declared themselves descended from gods, often tracing their lines to deities like Venus or Jupiter. Julius Caesar claimed divine ancestry, and Augustus called himself the son of a god. Their rule was not only political but cosmic. justified by blood that was said to carry the essence of the divine. Across centuries, the notion of holy lineage remained a powerful tool, legitimizing authority by linking it to something greater than human law. When Christianity rose, the Vatican condemned the pagan gods, yet the structure of sacred descent lived on. Popes were not chosen by inheritance, but history shows that papal dynasties quietly existed. Families like the Borgias and the Medici placed multiple members on the papal throne, their bloodlines weaving through the very heart of the church. Nepotism was not an accident. It was the survival of an ancient belief that blood carried spiritual authority, that ruling families held a unique right to speak for the divine. Though the Vatican denies any divine lineage, its history reveals patterns strikingly similar to the priest-kings of Sumer. The question then becomes unavoidable. Are the papal dynasties of history linked, even symbolically, to the sacred lines first claimed in Mesopotamia? If kingship was once seen as a gift from the gods, and if the Vatican holds the role of God's representative on earth, then perhaps both systems share the same root. One is born in the temples of Sumer, the other in the basilicas of Rome, but both rely on the idea that authority must flow through a select few, chosen not by chance but by lineage. The connection grows even more intriguing when we remember that many European royal families, themselves claiming descent from Rome and beyond, often intermarried with powerful papal families. The web of bloodlines stretched across thrones, altars, and crowns, binding church and state into a network that echoed the union of priest and king in ancient Sumer. If power in the modern world still relies on these inherited ties, then the idea of divine blood has never truly died. It has only been hidden behind robes and rituals. Perhaps the Vatican's silence on this matter is the loudest answer of all. To admit that papal dynasties mirror the ancient priest-kings would be to confess that its authority is not unique but inherited from a tradition far older. And if that is true, then the blood flowing through the corridors of the Vatican is not only Roman or Christian, but carries whispers from the world's first throne, where Sumerian kings once claimed their rule was written in the stars. Beneath the streets of Vatican City lies a world few have ever seen. Endless shelves stretching for miles, chambers sealed behind iron doors, manuscripts locked away from public eyes. This is the Vatican Secret Archive, a place where history is preserved not for humanity, but for a chosen few. Officially, it contains papal letters, state documents, and church records. But rumours have long whispered of something far older resting within its depths. Ancient tablets, relics, and artifacts from Mesopotamia itself, including treasures of Sumer that could rewrite the story of civilization. The possibility is not far-fetched. Since the 19th century, European explorers and archaeologists have carried countless artifacts out of Mesopotamian ruins. Many were sent to museums, but some disappeared into private collections. It would not be surprising if the Vatican, the most powerful religious institution in Europe, obtained pieces that were never catalogued. Stories circulate among researchers of cuneiform tablets, quietly transferred from excavation sites to church hands, relics that never reached universities or public display. If these objects exist in the archives, why would they be hidden? The answer may lie in the content of the tablets themselves. Sumerian writings speak of gods who came from the heavens, of advanced knowledge in mathematics, medicine, and astronomy, and of myths that parallel or even predate biblical accounts. If the Vatican holds these records, they may see them not as harmless curiosities, but as dangerous contradictions. A flood story written centuries before Noah, a tale of creation older than Genesis, a vision of divine beings that resemble angels yet are not. Each of these could shake the foundation of church authority if revealed in full. Keeping such items hidden also allows control over narrative. When the public only knows fragments of Sumerian history, the official story of Christianity remains unchallenged. But if complete tablets were available for study, parallels between Mesopotamian myths and biblical scripture might become undeniable. The church would no longer appear as the origin of truth, but as an inheritor, perhaps even a borrower of stories already written in clay thousands of years earlier. To admit this would not only challenge theology, but unravel centuries of carefully crafted tradition. There is another possibility, even more unsettling. Some researchers suggest that among the artifacts are maps or astronomical records, revealing knowledge beyond what ancient humanity should have possessed. Records of the stars, accounts of celestial beings, or technologies that seem out of place in their time. If such things exist, their release would not only undermine the Bible, but raise questions about the very origins of civilization. The Vatican might keep them hidden, not out of malice, but out of fear of what humanity would do with the truth. The archive remains sealed, its contents a mystery guarded with silence. Scholars are allowed entry only under strict conditions, and access to specific materials must be requested in advance. No one can simply wander the shelves, and photography is forbidden. If Sumerian tablets do lie in the vaults, they may never be seen by the world, and perhaps that is the greatest tragedy. The answers to humanity's forgotten past could be locked away, not destroyed, not lost, but intentionally hidden where no light reaches. A truth preserved only so it can remain untold. Sumer is remembered as the cradle of civilization, the first to build cities, invent writing, and map the heavens. Yet strangely, it also became one of history's great vanishings. By the second millennium before Christ, the cities that once thrived along the rivers of Mesopotamia were gone. Their temples fell silent, their schools closed, and their people absorbed into surrounding cultures. Archaeologists describe this as a collapse, but the word feels incomplete. How could a civilization that gave humanity its very foundations simply disappear? And, more importantly, what happened to the vast knowledge it had gathered? The usual explanation speaks of shifting rivers, invading armies, and the slow erosion of power. Yet none of these fully account for the silence that followed. The Sumerians did not vanish into extinction. They were absorbed by the Akkadians, then the Babylonians, then the Assyrians. Their language survived in temples for centuries. Their myths were rewritten and retold. Their mathematics and astronomy lived on in the hands of later scholars. It was not a disappearance in the sense of loss. It was a disappearance into the shadows, where their wisdom became the property of those who ruled after them. This pattern of absorption is suspiciously familiar. The Sumerians built libraries, schools, and vast collections of clay tablets. Yet when later empires rose, those collections were not destroyed. They were gathered. The Babylonians copied Sumerian myths into their own language. The Assyrians preserved Sumerian star charts. Knowledge that should have vanished instead became the private treasure of priestly elites. The public no longer had access to it, but it had not been erased. It had been hidden behind walls of power. If this sounds familiar, it is because history repeated itself in Europe. When Rome collapsed, knowledge did not truly disappear. It was absorbed by the church, locked inside monasteries and secret archives. The people were told they lived in darkness, yet behind closed doors the manuscripts were preserved, copied, and stored. The Vatican became the custodian of truth, releasing fragments only when it suited its narrative. In this way, the fate of Sumer echoes through time. A great civilization does not vanish into nothing. Its wisdom is collected, hidden, and controlled by those who inherit power. The question then becomes, who benefits from this disappearance? If the knowledge of Sumer had been openly preserved, humanity might have advanced centuries earlier. Instead, we are left with fragments, broken tablets, and myths told through filters. Perhaps the true purpose of absorbing Sumer's legacy was not to honour it, but to control it. By claiming its achievements as their own, later empires and institutions ensured that the original source was forgotten. Today, the ruins of Ur and Uruk lie in silence, their bricks crumbling under desert winds. But their spirit may live on in places we least expect, in rituals, in calendars, in symbols, and perhaps even in the very heart of the Vatican. Sumer may not have vanished at all. It may simply have been absorbed, its wisdom hidden like a river flowing underground, waiting to surface again when those in power choose to let it. The story of religion is often told as if each faith emerged separately, rising on its own soil and forming its own ideas. But when we trace the path from the first temples of Ur to the cathedrals of Rome, a different picture emerges. It is a chain, a long transfer of priestly traditions stretching across thousands of years, reshaping itself but never breaking. The rituals we see in the Vatican today may not be inventions of Christianity alone, but the latest face of practices born in Mesopotamia. In the city of Ur, priests climbed ziggurats to offer sacrifices to the gods. They wore sacred garments, recited prayers in languages the people could not understand, and maintained strict calendars of festivals tied to the movements of the heavens. When Babylon rose, it absorbed these customs. Babylonian priests preserved Sumerian hymns, rewritten in their own language, and continued to interpret dreams, read omens, and consult the stars. The idea that the divine will could be read and controlled through ritual did not vanish. It was carried forward, refined, and reinforced. Persia added its own layer. Zoroastrian priests emphasized fire as the symbol of divine truth, keeping eternal flames burning in temples. They developed elaborate systems of purity and confession, ideas that would later echo in Christian sacraments. Their influence spread westward as empires clashed and traded. By the time Greek philosophers encountered the East, they were already absorbing fragments of Mesopotamian and Persian thought. The Greeks adopted mystery religions, rituals of initiation that promised secret knowledge and salvation. They built temples where priests guided the people through sacred ceremonies that bore striking resemblances to those of Babylon and Sumer. Rome, inheriting from Greece, absorbed it all. Roman religion was a blend of conquest and adoption. Temples resembled those of the East. Priests wore robes, carried sacred staffs, and guarded rituals closed to ordinary citizens. Festivals followed cosmic cycles. Even the Roman emperors themselves adopted the role of priest-kings, merging political and spiritual authority in a way that mirrored the earliest rulers of Mesopotamia. By the time Christianity rose, the ground was already prepared. When the Vatican emerged as the center of the Christian world, it did not erase these traditions. It clothed them in new language. The altar became the Christian ziggurat. The Mass was recited in Latin as Sumerian prayers once were in forgotten tongues. Priests wore robes resembling those of Babylonian and Roman officials. Sacred days followed calendars shaped by astronomy. Even the Pope himself carried the weight of the ancient priest-king, presented as the bridge between heaven and earth. This continuity is not coincidence. It reveals that religious power has always been inherited, not reinvented. From Ur to Babylon, from Persia to Greece, from Rome to the Vatican, the same thread runs through. A priestly tradition that controls knowledge, mediates between humanity and the divine, and cloaks itself in ritual to maintain authority. The Vatican may appear as the culmination of Christian history, but in truth, it may be the latest guardian of a much older current, one that began when priests first raised their eyes to the stars over Mesopotamia and declared themselves the voices of the gods. Step into the ruins of an ancient Sumerian temple, and you would be met with the fragrance of burning incense, the rhythmic sound of chants rising into the air, and the sight of offerings placed before stone altars. These were not casual acts. They were carefully orchestrated rituals meant to honor the gods, to invite their presence, and to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. Every gesture carried meaning, every sound carried weight. The Sumerians believed that without these rituals the world would fall into chaos, and so priests repeated them endlessly, ensuring the gods remained appeased. Now, step into a Catholic cathedral, and the scene feels strangely familiar. Incense drifts through the air as priests wave censers before altars. Chants in Latin echo across vaulted ceilings, their rhythm designed to carry the mind beyond the ordinary. Offerings of bread and wine are placed upon the altar, transformed through ritual into sacred presence. The faithful kneel, listen, and respond in rehearsed patterns that mirror the order of the ceremony. Though separated by thousands of years, the continuity between these practices is undeniable. The Sumerians saw incense as the breath of the gods, a visible link between earth and sky. The rising smoke symbolized prayers lifted into the heavens. Catholic liturgy preserves the same symbolism. The smoke of incense is described as the prayers of the saints ascending before God. In both traditions, fragrance was not decoration but a spiritual bridge, a way of making the invisible visible. The act is identical in purpose, even if the language has changed. Chants too reveal the continuum. In Sumerian temples, priests recited hymns in tonal patterns that created an atmosphere of mystery and awe. The sounds were believed to hold power, shaping reality and summoning divine presence. In Catholic tradition, Gregorian chants serve the same role. They are not merely songs, but sacred sounds intended to elevate the mind and open a space for divine encounter. The rhythm, repetition, and solemn tone echo the same ancient idea that sound itself is a path to the gods. Then there are offerings. The Sumerians placed bread, water, wine, and even animal sacrifices upon their altars. These gifts were symbolic exchanges, giving back to the gods what was believed to sustain life. The Catholic Mass also centers on offerings, bread and wine raised upon the altar and consecrated as the body and blood of Christ. The physical forms differ, yet the underlying principle is the same. Humanity offers the fruits of earth and labor in a sacred act meant to connect with the divine. Some would call this coincidence, the natural result of all religions developing similar ways to worship, but the specific parallels between Sumerian and Catholic ritual suggest more than chance. It is as if an ancient pattern was absorbed, carried forward, and adapted to new names and new doctrines. The rituals endure because they work, not only spiritually but socially, binding communities together under the authority of those who lead them. The Vatican rarely acknowledges such continuity, preferring to present its liturgy as wholly unique. Yet, when the smoke of incense curls upward in street, Peter's Basilica, it carries with it the memory of ziggurats, where the same act was performed 5,000 years ago. The ritual continuum stretches unbroken, a thread of sacred performance, linking the first civilization to the most enduring institution of the modern world. In the myths of Sumer, there are beings who descend from the heavens, mighty figures called the Anunnaki. They are described as bringers of knowledge, masters of agriculture, law, and the stars. They guided humanity, yet also demanded obedience, shaping civilizations according to their will. To the Sumerians, they were gods, but their descriptions sound less like distant deities and more like powerful visitors who walked among men. Centuries later, in the Hebrew texts, we find another group of mysterious beings, the Watchers. These were angels who came down to earth, who taught forbidden knowledge, who fathered strange offspring with human women. Their actions led to chaos, corruption, and finally the Great Flood. The similarity between the Anunnaki and the Watchers is striking. Both are described as descending from above. Both are teachers of hidden wisdom, and both leave behind a legacy that humanity was not meant to fully inherit. When the Bible speaks of the sons of God taking the daughters of men, it echoes the same theme found in Sumerian stories. The Anunnaki were said to mix with humanity, creating rulers who carried divine blood. In Genesis, this act becomes sin, a fall from grace, the beginning of corruption. It is as though the same story was retold, but cast in a darker light, transforming benefactors into rebels, gods into fallen angels. The question arises, did the Vatican inherit knowledge of these parallels, and has it chosen to conceal them? Hidden texts suggest that the connection was once widely known. The Book of Enoch, excluded from the biblical canon, describes the Watchers in detail, naming them, recounting their teachings, and linking them directly to the corruption of mankind. Enoch speaks of astronomy, metallurgy, and medicine being revealed by these beings, knowledge that mirrors what the Sumerians credited to the Anunnaki. Why would such a book be excluded? Perhaps because it revealed too much, too clearly. Perhaps because it tied biblical tradition directly back to Sumerian myths. If the Vatican holds original Mesopotamian tablets in its archives, then the overlap would be undeniable. The descriptions of gods descending, of beings teaching forbidden knowledge, of a flood sent to erase their influence, all align too perfectly with both Sumerian and biblical accounts. To admit this would unravel the carefully maintained separation between Christian doctrine and ancient myth. It would show that the Church did not begin with a wholly new revelation, but stood on foundations first laid in the cities of Sumer. The silence of the Vatican on these matters may itself be telling. By neither confirming nor denying, it keeps the line between myth and scripture blurred. The Anunnaki remain gods of a forgotten world. The Watchers remain fallen angels, and humanity is left with fragments, forced to wonder if they are in fact the same beings described in two different ways. If the Vatican possesses texts that reveal the truth, it holds the power to confirm or to bury the greatest link between the first civilization and the faith that still shapes the modern world. Perhaps one day those vaults will open, and the Watchers of old will step out of myth and back into history. Until then, the shadows remain. The story of civilization is not told as it happened. It is told as rulers want it remembered. When we look closely at the chain of empires, from Assyria to Babylon, from Rome to the Vatican, a pattern emerges. Each power built its authority not only on armies and walls, but on words. They rewrote the past, claimed the heritage of those before them, and obscured the original source. And at the beginning of that chain lies Sumer, the first civilization, whose foundations have been borrowed, rebranded, and hidden under layers of new stories. The Assyrians conquered much of Mesopotamia and inherited Sumerian traditions. They copied the old myths, but reshaped them to glorify their own kings. Sumerian gods were given new names. Sumerian cities were presented as trophies of Assyrian might. The original creators of writing, astronomy, and law were turned into background figures, overshadowed by a new narrative of empire. In this way, the memory of Sumer was not destroyed but rewritten, its brilliance claimed by those who followed. Babylon repeated the process. The Babylonians adopted Sumerian deities, but elevated Marduk as their supreme god, rewriting creation myths to place him at the center. The Enuma Elish itself is a reworking of earlier Sumerian stories, edited so Babylon would stand as the chosen city of the gods. By changing the script, they secured divine legitimacy. The people believed Babylon's authority came from heaven, when in truth it was borrowed from the past. Once again, the original Sumerian foundation was blurred beneath a new design. Rome followed centuries later, mastering this same art. Roman religion absorbed Greek gods, who themselves had absorbed fragments of Mesopotamian myth. By the time Rome declared its emperors divine, the echoes of Sumer were faint but still present. Rituals, calendars, symbols, and sacred titles had roots in the earliest temples of Ur and Uruk, but the Roman state claimed them as its own inventions. By rewriting history, Rome made itself appear eternal, as if its destiny had always been written in the stars. Then came the Vatican, rising from Rome's ashes, inheriting not only its city but its strategies. The Church took the fragments of ancient myths and wrapped them in biblical language. Flood stories became the tale of Noah. Creation myths became Genesis. Celestial beings became angels or demons. By reshaping these narratives, the Vatican did not erase Sumer. It absorbed it, presenting itself as the sole guardian of truth. The faithful were told these stories came only from Scripture, unaware that their roots lay in clay tablets buried thousands of years earlier. The question is, who benefits when original history is obscured? The answer is simple: those in power. By rewriting the past, empires create a story that makes their rule seem inevitable, divinely ordained, and unquestionable. If Sumer is remembered only as a shadow, then Babylon, Rome, and the Vatican appear as the true lights of civilization. But if the truth were revealed, if people saw that much of what we call religion and law began in Sumer, then the authority of later powers would weaken. Perhaps that is why the story of Sumer is still incomplete, not because the evidence is missing, but because the narrative has been carefully managed, rewritten again and again, until the first voice of civilization is barely heard at all. For the Sumerians, the boundary between heaven and earth was not fixed. They believed there were gateways, points where the divine could cross into the human world. Their temples, especially the massive ziggurats, were more than monuments of stone. They were stairways, portals built to connect the sky and the ground. Priests ascended them, carrying offerings, believing that at the top they stood closer to the realm of the gods. These structures were called bonds between heaven and earth, cosmic gateways designed to bring the infinite into contact with the mortal. Some researchers even suggest that their myths spoke of literal stargates, openings through which gods descended, symbols of technology or power beyond our modern understanding. This obsession with gateways shaped their culture. Rituals began at temple entrances, hymns invoked doors of the heavens, and even myths describe gods travelling through gates of light. To the Sumerians, access to the divine was not abstract. It was physical, architectural, encoded in the very layout of their cities. Every ziggurat and every sacred gate reminded the people that there was a path between worlds, a way to reach the divine if one followed the rituals of the priests. Now, turn to the Vatican, and the similarities are impossible to ignore. The Great Dome of St. Peter's Basilica is not just a feat of engineering. It is a symbolic sky, curving above the faithful, representing the heavens resting directly over the earth. When worshippers gather beneath it, they stand inside a structure designed as a cosmic meeting point. The Vatican obelisk that stands in St. Peter's Square also speaks this same language. Originally from Egypt, it was placed at the heart of the square as a needle pointing toward the heavens, an axis binding earth and sky. Together, the dome and obelisk form a cosmic alignment that echoes the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. This is not coincidence. Architecture has always been the silent carrier of sacred meaning. Just as the Sumerians encoded their cosmology in stone, so too has the Vatican. The layout of St. Peter's Square, with its sweeping arms embracing the faithful, resembles ancient temple courtyards meant to gather people before the ascent to a higher realm. The obelisk at its centre acts as the sacred pillar, a cosmic marker, while the dome above channels the heavens. The message is the same as it was thousands of years ago. Here is the gateway. Here is the place where earth meets sky. If this is continuity, it suggests the Vatican has preserved not only stories and symbols from the Sumerians, but their architectural language as well. It has inherited the knowledge that buildings can serve as cosmic tools, shaping belief not through words but through space itself. The faithful who step into St. Peter's Basilica may not think of Sumer, yet they walk into the same idea, that heaven is not far away, but present, accessible through sacred design. Perhaps this is why the Vatican's architecture inspires awe, even to non-believers. It speaks a language older than Christianity, older than Rome, a language first spoken in the bricks of Ur and Uruk. The cosmic gateways of the Sumerians may no longer stand tall in the desert, but their memory survives in the stones of the Vatican, quietly reminding us that the path to the heavens has always been built into the structures of power. At the very centre of St. Peter's Square, rising like a silent sentinel, stands an ancient obelisk. Tourists take pictures of it every day. Pilgrims walk past it without question, and yet few pause to wonder why this towering monument rests at the heart of Catholicism. The Vatican claims it as a relic of Egypt, brought to Rome by an emperor and eventually placed in its current position by Pope Sixtus V in the year 1586. But the roots of this monument stretch deeper than Egypt. They reach back to Mesopotamia, to the first civilizations that raised pillars as markers of the sky and symbols of divine connection. The obelisk is a single piece of granite, nearly 4,000 years old, older than Christianity itself. In Egypt, it represented a frozen sunbeam, a link between the solar god Ra and the earth below. It was an axis, a point where heaven and earth touched. But even before Egypt adopted this form, Mesopotamian cultures already built sacred pillars, stelae, and standing stones. To the Sumerians, these markers were more than decoration. They were cosmic tools, aligning with the stars, tracking the heavens, and serving as gateways between the mortal and the divine. The obelisk in St. Peter's Square is not an isolated symbol. It is the continuation of a tradition that began in the first cities of Sumer. The placement of the Vatican obelisk is especially telling. It stands at the exact centre of the square, aligned with the basilica, forming a powerful axis. Around it, the colonnades stretch like arms, embracing the faithful. Above it rises the dome of St. Peter's Basilica, the symbolic sky. Together, they form a cosmic alignment, a design echoing the ancient ziggurats where pillars and stairways marked the meeting of heaven and earth. The Vatican could have chosen any monument to place here, yet it chose an obelisk. Why? Some argue it was simply a trophy, a relic of Rome's conquest of Egypt, but the Vatican's decision to preserve it, consecrate it, and position it at the centre of its most sacred square suggests a deeper purpose. This obelisk was not hidden away in a museum. It was raised as the focal point of Catholicism itself. To the untrained eye, it is just stone, but to those who understand symbolism, it is a declaration. The Vatican is the inheritor of ancient wisdom, the guardian of traditions older than the Church, stretching back to the sky cults of Mesopotamia. The question then becomes, why guard it so carefully? Perhaps because the obelisk is more than history. It is a key. Its presence at the heart of the Vatican reveals continuity between the first civilizations and the modern Church. It is a reminder, to those who know how to read it, that sacred power has always been tied to the sky, to the stars, to the connection between heaven and earth. By preserving the obelisk, the Vatican does not merely honour the past, it absorbs it, declaring itself the final custodian of a line that began with Sumerian priests gazing at the heavens. For most visitors, the obelisk is invisible, lost in the grandeur of the square. But for those who look deeper, it is the most important monument of all. It is the silent proof that Catholicism has never been isolated, that its symbols are built on foundations older than Scripture. Standing in the centre of St. Peter's Square, the obelisk does not speak in words, but it whispers a message as old as civilization itself. The Vatican has inherited the stones of the first sky cults, and it guards them at the very heart of its power. In the 19th century, a wave of explorers and archaeologists descended upon the deserts of Mesopotamia. They uncovered ruins buried for thousands of years, revealing the lost world of Sumer. Broken tablets, colossal statues, and fragments of temples began to emerge from the sand, sparking a race among nations to claim the treasures of the first civilization. Britain, France, and Germany competed fiercely, sending crates of artifacts to their museums. But quietly, in the background, another power was watching: the Vatican. Through the Jesuit order, the Church maintained a strong presence in the Middle East. Jesuit scholars were not only missionaries but also linguists, historians, and archaeologists. They had access to areas few outsiders could enter, building schools and missions that doubled as listening posts for discoveries. Reports from the 19th and early 20th centuries show Jesuits involved in studies of cuneiform, translations of tablets, and even direct participation in digs. While their contributions were often framed as purely academic, whispers suggest a deeper mission. Were they retrieving artifacts not for museums, but for the hidden vaults beneath the Vatican? The timing is suspicious. At the same moment European empires were proudly displaying their Mesopotamian finds to the public, the Vatican was expanding its own secret archive, a collection already rumoured to stretch for miles underground. Jesuit scholars had both the training to identify important relics and the networks to move them discreetly. Unlike a national museum, the Vatican had no reason to announce its acquisitions. If rare tablets or relics reached Rome, they would not be exhibited, they would be locked away, accessible only to those deemed worthy. Why would the Vatican care so much about Sumerian artifacts? The answer may lie in the content of the discoveries. Cuneiform tablets revealed creation myths older than Genesis, flood stories older than Noah, and gods whose descriptions paralleled biblical angels. If these texts were widely known, they could challenge the claim that the Bible was the original word of God. By acquiring such artifacts quietly, the Vatican could ensure that the most dangerous ones never saw the light of day. What the public received were fragments, while the most disruptive pieces may have been hidden away. Some researchers point to curious disappearances. Certain tablets mentioned in excavation notes never appeared in museum records. Crates shipped from dig sites arrived incomplete. Local workers spoke of objects removed by foreign priests, who paid in gold and vanished without trace. Though such accounts are difficult to prove, the pattern is suggestive. Wherever ancient knowledge threatened the established narrative, the Vatican seemed to be nearby, with Jesuit scholars at the centre. Today, the role of Jesuit archaeologists is rarely discussed outside specialist circles. Their official reports emphasise language study and academic curiosity, yet the question remains: did they also act as agents of collection, ensuring that the Vatican obtained the most sensitive relics of the first civilization? If so, then the archives beneath Rome may contain more than papal documents. They may house the missing pieces of human history, sealed away not because they were lost, but because they were deliberately hidden. And if that is true, then the story of Jesuit archaeology is not only about discovery, it is about control, a silent effort to guard the legacy of Sumer from ever truly belonging to the world. When archaeologists first uncovered the ruins of Mesopotamia in the 19th century, they were stunned by the sheer volume of cuneiform tablets buried beneath the sands. Thousands of clay fragments were packed into crates and shipped to museums in London, Paris, and Berlin. These collections became the foundation for our modern understanding of Sumer. Yet, curiously, many tablets described in early excavation records never appeared in any museum catalogue. They vanished between discovery and display, raising the question of where they went. Some researchers believe the Vatican holds the answer. Among the most discussed are tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, discovered in the mid-1800s. This library contained copies of older Sumerian myths, including the Atrahasis flood story and the Enuma Elish creation epic. But reports from the dig mentioned tablets that described the descent of the gods and mysteries of the heavens that never reached the British Museum. These particular items are missing from the official collection, though they were clearly noted at the time of excavation. Were they lost in transport, or were they intercepted? Another set of missing tablets comes from the ruins of Ur, the birthplace of Abraham according to tradition. Excavators in the early 20th century recorded the recovery of tablets describing rituals of the high priests and genealogies of kings stretching back thousands of years. Some of these records were translated, but others, including references to divine ancestry, disappeared. Later, catalogues omit them entirely. Scholars have speculated that the Vatican, already deeply interested in anything connected to biblical origins, may have acquired these artifacts quietly. If they revealed connections between Sumerian priest kings and later biblical patriarchs, their disappearance would make sense. There are also strange stories of tablets from Lagash that described advanced astronomical knowledge. Excavation notes suggest they recorded the positions of planets beyond what the naked eye could see, knowledge supposedly impossible for an ancient culture. These tablets were mentioned briefly in academic reports, but never presented in full. Researchers looking for them in museum archives found nothing. It is as if they were erased from history. If such artifacts exist, their implications would be enormous, and if the Vatican obtained them, they would be locked away, protected from public view, their contents known only to a few. The pattern is too consistent to ignore. Time and again, the most provocative tablets are the ones that disappear. The fragments that survive in museums tend to be myths or economic records, safe for public study. But the pieces that speak of gods descending, of forbidden knowledge, of human origins linked to the divine, are the ones that vanish. If these ended up in the Vatican's secret archive, it would explain why they are missing from scholarly circulation. The Vatican insists its archive holds only church documents, yet its secrecy fuels suspicion. If the missing tablets are truly there, then humanity's oldest stories are not lost. They are hidden, preserved, but withheld. Perhaps one day they will be revealed, but until then the world must rely on fragments, while the complete truth lies sealed behind stone walls in Rome, waiting for a voice brave enough to open the vaults of silence. The Sumerians were not just farmers building mud brick cities. They were astronomers charting the heavens with uncanny accuracy, healers experimenting with herbs and surgical techniques, and engineers creating irrigation systems that still astonish modern researchers. They wrote of medicine, metallurgy, and even devices that sound eerily like mechanical instruments. For a civilization that rose nearly 6,000 years ago, their achievements seemed almost out of place in their time. Which raises the troubling question: what if this knowledge was never truly lost, but instead passed hand to hand until it reached the Vatican? Consider astronomy. The Sumerians mapped the stars, tracked planetary cycles, and divided the sky into constellations still used today. They recorded eclipses and the movement of Venus with precision that modern computers confirm as accurate. Later civilizations absorbed this celestial science, from the Babylonians to the Greeks, and then to the Romans. By the time Europe stumbled into the so-called Dark Ages, the Church had become the sole guardian of astronomical knowledge. The Vatican calendar reforms of the 16th century are often celebrated as scientific progress, yet they may have been built on ancient Sumerian systems kept in secrecy for centuries. Medicine tells a similar story. Excavated tablets describe treatments for infections, broken bones, and even references to organ function. Some remedies, written in cuneiform thousands of years ago, match modern herbal prescriptions. The Sumerians spoke of blood as the carrier of life, an understanding far ahead of their time. And yet during the Middle Ages, European medicine was said to be primitive, focused more on prayers than cures. But in the archives of monasteries, ancient medical texts were copied and hidden. If the Vatican inherited Sumerian medical knowledge, it may have deliberately delayed its spread, releasing only fragments when it suited their authority. Then there is technology. The Sumerians built vast networks of canals, ziggurats that aligned with the stars, and devices that some researchers claim hint at early machines. Ancient legends describe gifts of the gods that sound suspiciously like advanced tools. If these traditions survived in written form, then whoever controlled them would possess a treasure far beyond gold. The Vatican, with its secret vaults stretching for miles, may have gathered these fragments over centuries, removing them from public reach. The question is why? The answer may be power. If the masses believe that knowledge vanished in a dark age and was later reborn through the Church, then the Church becomes the bringer of light. But if people discovered that such knowledge had existed all along, guarded in silence, the illusion would shatter. Faith would no longer rest on miracle, but on hidden science. Authority would crumble. Perhaps this is why whispers persist of manuscripts locked away, texts describing planetary mechanics centuries before Copernicus, surgical methods long before modern hospitals, and strange devices that hint at forgotten technologies. If true, then the Vatican does not merely preserve the past, It controls the present by choosing when the past is allowed to return. The knowledge of the gods may still exist, but until it is freed, it remains a weapon of silence. From the very first stories, carved into clay tablets, to the towering cathedrals that still cast shadows over Europe, one thread seems to weave through it all. We are told the Vatican rose from the life of Christ and the spread of Christianity. But what if its roots sink far deeper into time, into the soil of Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians first built their temples and recorded the laws of gods and men? The possibility lingers like a ghost, that the Church is not only the heir of Rome, but the custodian of something much older. The parallels are too many to dismiss. The Sumerians worshipped divine beings who came from the heavens. The Bible speaks of angels descending to guide humanity, and the Vatican guards the story of fallen watchers with careful silence. Sumerian ziggurats reached for the sky like stairways to the gods, while Catholic towers and domes promised the same bridge between earth and heaven. Inanna was adored as the Queen of Heaven, a celestial mother whose image echoes in the figure of Mary. Sacred bloodlines, sacred language, sacred rituals all appear not as sudden inventions, but as inherited fragments of a forgotten age. The Vatican's vaults, stretching mile after mile beneath the surface, are said to hold not just papal documents, but artifacts that predate Christianity itself. Missing tablets from ancient digs, maps that chart lands unknown, manuscripts that tell stories older than Genesis. If this is true, then the Vatican's silence is not accidental, it is deliberate. To reveal such things would unravel the narrative that faith alone guided the world out of darkness. Instead, the hidden thread must remain hidden, binding together two civilizations across thousands of years. But silence does not erase the questions. Why did Sumer vanish so suddenly, leaving behind wonders but no clear end? Why do biblical stories mirror Sumerian myths so closely? Why do Vatican rituals, symbols, and architecture reflect practices first born on Mesopotamian soil? And why has the Church always positioned itself as the guardian of history, never its liberator? Perhaps the truth is simple. Power does not always need to destroy knowledge. Sometimes it only needs to bury it and decide when or if it will be unearthed. A civilization may disappear from the maps, but if its wisdom survives in secret, then it never truly dies. It becomes a hidden current, shaping the future while remaining unseen. And so we return to the question that has lingered since the beginning. Did the Vatican emerge not from Christ alone, but as the keeper of the Sumerian legacy? If the world's first civilization still whispers through the world's most powerful church, then what else have we been led to forget? If our history has been rewritten once, how many more times has the script been altered? And if the truth lies locked away in vaults of stone, then perhaps we do not live in the light of knowledge at all. Perhaps we still walk in shadows, guided only by what someone long ago decided we were allowed to remember.